Chadwick. By 200, there were about 100 episcopal sees in Italy. By the year 251, the resources of the church in Rome had grown so much that it was supporting from its common purse not only the bishop, 46 presbyters, 7 deacons, 7 subdeacons, 42 acolytes, 52 exorcists, readers and doorkeepers, but also more than 1,500 widows and needy persons. All of them were fed, quote, by the grace and kindness of the Lord. Christians served in the army during this period, many times in positions of authority and respect, and even important provincial governors were known to be Christians by this time. In fact, and this is one little image that can sum up the whole period for you. At the city of Nicomedia, which was the imperial city at this time, the major Christian basilica was directly across the street from the emperor's palace. Okay? In the year 270. The truth is that a lot of the falsity of the great apostasy is rooted in nothing more than anachronism. It pictures the church acting and relating to Constantine's government the same way that it did to Nero's, which had been about 300 years earlier. It's really something akin to passing a Quaker meeting house out here on a modern highway and imagining the people inside all dressed like William Penn. It's an anachronism. So in reality, Christianity in Rome was institutional by Constantine's day. Sort of like the Jews prior to World War II. They lived in Europe in ghettos of their own. They weren't herded into them. They created them on their own. They had to be within walking distance of the synagogue. But they lived amongst their own people. They had their own ways. And they were very little bothered by the pagan government. Okay? Well, second aspect of this, not only was the church before Constantine not persecuted, it apparently wasn't very pure either. This was another thing I was shocked by. The great Christian scholar Origen, who wrote in the about 250, he says flat out that the church was whoring in the 3rd century. We don't think about that much, do we? This is the early church, isn't it? Eusebius, you may have read the passage in Eusebius. Here's how he describes the 3rd century, the 200s AD. As always happens when there is an abundance of liberty in our lives, we became indolent and careless. We envied one another and did harm to our brethren. Any wretched excuse was sufficient to start a war of arms, as it were, with the spear thrust of words. Leaders poured ill fame on other leaders. Nation rose against nation. Pretense and damned hypocrisy seemed to reach their evil height. Like senseless people, we did not trouble to make our God propitious and benevolent toward us, but like certain atheists who consider that human affairs are neither guarded nor watched over, we piled wickedness upon wickedness. Those who were supposed to be our pastors disdained the paths of divine piety and inflamed their hearts in contests with one another. In fact, I discovered in my researches that the abuses were so bad in the 3rd century church that many local church councils, synods, had to be convened to try to bring some reform. One of these was the Council of Elvira. And in the Council of Elvira, which was held about 300 AD, we've got the records of that council and its minutes. Okay? Here's what they give is really a pretty harrowing list of crimes that were going on well before A.J. Tomlinson's Deep Blackness and Dark Ages. Here's the list. Pastors loan sharking the faithful. Money-grubbing bishops living the high life out of church funds. Presbyters shacked up with female parishioners. Deacons visiting and participating in pagan worship. A clergy winking at and themselves routinely participating in gambling, divorce, and adultery. As for abuses among the laity, the council lists routine fornication before marriage, rampant divorce and remarriage, the abortion of children conceived in adultery. So if anything, the pure early church seems to have been more pure in its morals, at any rate, after Constantine than it was before. This was also the age of the traditores. The church was so badly off, whoring so bad, that when another persecution did finally come under Diocletian, most of the Christians gave in immediately. We've got records of whole churches, when the police come to the door, they all stand in line. The line took 2 hours to get through. They all stood in line so they could go up and offer the pagan sacrifice. They brought the books, the scrolls, the Bible, they brought it out gladly. Okay? In fact, one of the reasons why none of our Bible manuscripts are much older than this period is that so many of them were offered up so easily. So, for me, what this meant was that practically every one of the most basic facts in the great apostasy theory had fallen to pieces. Not only was the early church displaying its Catholic element long before Constantine, but the post-Constantinian church compared quite favorably with its pre-Constantinian version in just about every respect. What stood out for me, and this was the turning point, what stood out for me was the continuity between 1st and 4th century faith. So, now, was I ready to jump ship for Rome? Well, no. I was still worried about the most pagan feeling of Rome's accoutrements, things like Mary and statues, all of those things. Now, like Newman, I tried to content myself for a long time with the via media, a middle road, which in my case meant attending the churches that most downplayed the great apostasy. I spent time with charismatic Episcopal churches, with high church Anglicanism. But I did continue that nasty habit of reading the church fathers. I mean, after all, think about it. If this is the period when the Catholic faith was sort of heedlessly fumbled away, carelessly fumbled away, and if Constantine really did crown himself on Christ's throne, then these were the fools and knaves. These church fathers were the men who let it slip away, who let it happen, who didn't protest. So were they fools and knaves? Not in my reading. In fact, they were heroes. They humbled me. Not only did I not find them compromising with paganism, I found them heroically standing up against it. There really was an attempt to bring pagan elements into Christianity at this time. Historians call it Arianism. Okay? Here's another one of, and these men, the very men we're talking about, they heroically resisted Arianism in prison, in exile, to the shedding of their blood for decades. And by the way, this is another of the flaws in the great apostasy theory. Constantine could not have made the Roman Empire Christian because he wasn't a Christian himself. He never accepted baptism until he was on his deathbed, and then it was at the hands of the Arian bishop. So he was an Arian. He was never any more than an Arian. Okay, he certainly was not a Roman Catholic. Well, what were these heroes, these great men like Athanasius and Alexander and Hilary of Poitiers and these others? What did they say that they were standing up for in their battle with Constantine? They said it was the Catholic Church, straight up. And I found absolutely nothing in their writings that didn't have some sort of 1st and 2nd century counterpart. So, I've got to conclude. I see I'm out of time. Surely something momentous must have happened on Constantine's watch for all of these fingers to be pointed in his way. What about Mary and all those statues? Well, I don't have time this evening to go into all the details of what I found when I researched those things, but let me say it's an absolutely fascinating story. And I hope that you will have patience with me as I try to finish a second book, sort of a follow-up to